Let's review how to solve linear equations. The things to remember when solving an equation are to keep things balanced and equal. It's an equation. The two sides have to always remain equal. Number 2, the goal is to move terms around and get all of your variables on one side of the equation. Number 3, when solving equations, simplify the equation and combine like terms as much as you can on each side of the equal sign first. Then perform inverse operations. Inverse means opposite. So inverse operations one at a time until you have the variable term. So the term that involves the variable, like 3x or 5x or negative 2x. So until you have that variable term by itself on one side of the equation. So let's remind ourselves how we undo the following operations. So the inverse of addition would be subtraction. So if we had an equation like x plus 7 equals 9, you would solve it, you would undo the addition by doing subtraction. Subtraction would be the inverse operation. So you would subtract 7 from both sides and see that on the left side, 7 minus 7 is 0, canceling it out, leaving you with just x. Bring down your equal sign. On the right side, 9 take away 7 gives you 2, so x equals 2. And if we plug it in to check, we know that it works. If we plug the 2 in here, 2 plus 7 really does equal 9. The inverse of subtraction would be addition. So if we had something like negative 4 plus x equals 11, to solve for x, we would do inverse operations. So the opposite of adding would be to subtract. So you'd have to subtract negative 4. But subtracting a negative is really just adding. So we'd end up adding the 4. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0, cancels out, leaving you with the x. And then 11 plus 4 gives us 15. The inverse of multiplication is division. So if we have an equation like negative 8x equals 32, and we want to solve for x to undo multiplication, because that's what this means, when we have two things shoved next to each other, so negative 8 is shoved next to the x without a symbol in between, that means multiplication. So the inverse of multiplication is division, so we're going to divide both sides by negative 8 and see that x equals negative 4. Again, we should always check our work, so if we take our answer and plug it in, it should work out. So negative 8 times negative 4 is positive 32, and it checks. Okay, so if you have an equation with fractions, first thing you want to do is get the fraction by itself. So get the fraction by itself before undoing it. So again, you want to get the fraction by itself before undoing it. So division, that's what a fraction means. A fraction means division. So to undo division, you're going to multiply by the value in the denominator. Because a fraction means to divide, so the thing in the denominator is what you're dividing by. So the inverse of division is multiplying. So to undo it, you have to multiply it by that value that's down in the bottom. For example, if you had something like x divided by 3 equals 7, to solve for x, you're going to multiply by 3. On the left-hand side, remind yourself that 3 is a whole number, so 3 is really 3 over 1 times x over 3. That's going to give you 3x. In the top, 3 times x is 3x, 1 times 3 is 3, and that's going to simplify just to x. So the left-hand side just becomes x, and on the right, 7 times 3 is 21. Now, if you have a fraction attached to a variable, you can solve that by multiplying by the reciprocal. The reciprocal means to flip the fraction upside down. So, for example, if we had 2/3 x equals 8. To solve 2/3 x equals 8 and undo this, this means we're taking 2/3 and multiplying it by x. So the opposite would be to divide by 2/3, but we don't divide by fractions. Instead, we multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. The reciprocal just means to flip it upside down. So you're going to multiply both sides by 3/2. So on the left-hand side, 3 times 2 is 6, 2 times 3 is 6, so you get 6 over 6x. On the right-hand side, 8 is a whole number, it's 8 over 1, so 8 times 3 is 24, 1 times 2 is 2, and so you simplify and you get that x equals 12. So 2/3 of 12 equals 8. So again, if you have a fraction attached to the variable, just multiply by its reciprocal, which just means to flip it upside down. So let's take a look at some examples. Number 1, we've got 5x plus 2 equals negative 3x minus 12. First thing we want to do is get these variables together on one side of the equation. So I'm going to move this term over to the left by doing its inverse. Since it's negative 3x, I'm going to add 3x to both sides. So you'll get 8x plus 2 equals negative 12. Because 5x plus 3x is 8x, bring down the plus 2, bring down the equal sign, negative 3x plus 3x is 0, bring down the negative 12. To undo the plus 2, the inverse of adding is subtracting, so you're going to subtract 2 from both sides. So you get 8x equals negative 14, because if you have negative 12 and you take away 2 more, you get negative 14. Divide both sides by the 8, because 8x means 8 times x, and the opposite of multiplying is to divide. And then you can leave it as a fraction. We just need to reduce it. These are both even numbers, so you got to divide them both by 2. You'll get negative 7 over 4. We will be keeping things exact like that most of the time in Algebra 2. We'll be using fractions the vast majority of the time. If you really want to take it to a decimal, you can. It's negative 1.75. But again, fractions are preferred for this course. Alright, number 2. First thing I see is distributive property. So remember this, you've got a number on the outside of a quantity, you've got to distribute it in. So we'll distribute the 2 in and multiply it by each term inside the parentheses. The 5 and the plus sign stay the same. 2 times 3 is 6. Put down your other plus sign, 2 times 2x is 4x. And it equals 19. So now I've got some like terms here I can combine, because they're both just regular numbers. So 5 plus 6 is 11. So you have 11 plus 4x equals 19. I want this term all by itself, so I got to get rid of the 11, move it over here. So because it's positive, the opposite is subtraction. So you're going to subtract 11 from both sides of the equation. 11 minus 11 is 0, so that's gone. I'm going to bring down the 4x, the positive 4x, bring down the equal sign. 19 take away 11 gives you 8. Now remember, this means multiplication. It's 4 times x, since they're shoved together with nothing in there. So the opposite of multiplying is to divide. So you're going to divide both sides by 4, and you see that x equals 2. And we should always check our answer. We didn't do that on the last one, so let's go ahead and do it now. We should plug it in, and it should work. It should satisfy the equation. So if we replace x with 2, the left-hand side of the equation should simplify to equal 19. So order of operations tells us to start inside the parentheses with the 2 times 2 gives us 4. Then still inside the parentheses, 3 plus 4 is 7. 2 times 7 is 14, multiplying before adding. And then 5 plus 14 is 19. And it checks. Alright, so on this last example, again, we're trying to get the x by itself. So first thing I gotta undo is this minus 1. So you're gonna go ahead and add 1. So you'll get x plus 3 divided by 5 equals 8. Next thing we gotta undo is this. So this is a fraction. Fraction means divide, so we're dividing by 5. The opposite of dividing is to multiply. So you're going to multiply both sides by 5. Multiplying by 5 and dividing by 5 are going to cancel. Because if you multiplied it in, this is 5 over 1. So it'd be 5x plus 15 divided by 5. And it would just divide back out to just x plus 3. So these things cancel. Got x plus 3 equals 40. So now, last thing to do to get the x by itself, get rid of this, so you're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So we get x equals 37. And again, we should plug it in and check. So 37 plus 3 divided by 5 minus 1, we want to see, does that equal 7? Well, you get 40 divided by 5 minus 1. So 40 divided by 5 is 8. 8 minus 1 is 7. 7 equals 7, and it checks. So that's solving equations. You want to use inverse operations piece by piece to work your way toward getting the variable all alone on one side. And when you do that, when you find your solution, you always have to check your answer. So whether you write it down or you just do a quick mental check, you got to plug it back in, simplify it down, and make sure you get the same answer on both sides.